too, and a liquor-mazed head was the last thing he'd need the next day, particularly considering the quality of whiskey that went around the front lines. It was a myth that Tennivel's knights never surrendered. The training was very clear about recognizing lost causes. Sleep, at that moment, was among them. He disentangled himself from his sweat-dampened bedroll as quickly and quietly as he could manage. None of his companions stirred. It was funny. Their alertness was legendary, but any experienced warrior grew accustomed to certain sounds. In camp, these included both snoring that could shake the earth and the noises of a tentmate trying to make a stealthy exit in the middle of the night. Tennivel hadn't given them heroic bladders, after all. Putting on armor would be more likely to rouse his tentmates, so Olvir simply tugged on his breeches, then picked up his boots and tunic in one hand. He carried the belt with his sword on it in the other. The camp was relatively peaceful, no attack expected, but there was no point tempting fate. Edda had taught him that, long before he'd entered the Silver Wind's order as a page. He stumbled outside into a chilly grey pre-dawn. The remains of fires made the camp a little brighter, but, at that hour, mostly just added smoke to the air. A flash of Olvir's dreams sprang from fading memory to vivid detail with the odor. He sat down hard on a rock. Vomiting would only waste rations, and the army had a strictly limited number of those. Screaming would only wake soldiers who had too little rest as it was. Olvir scrubbed his hands hard across his face, wishing that he could do the same to his mind, trying not to look too long at his hands themselves. They had been the worst part, and that had been a new element of the dream. If your thoughts are sour, turn to deeds. It was another of Edda's sayings, and Olvir was already sitting down. Getting dressed was the obvious next step. He pulled on his boots, listening to the sounds near him. The camp was mostly still abed, but not entirely. Out of the 3,000 or so souls who defended that part of Kriwath's border, 50-odd were assigned to patrol the fortifications. Olvir could glance up and see 2 of them walking behind the wooden palisades, peering through cracks too small for arrows as they tried to spot any activity beyond. He could certainly hear their footsteps, regular drumbeats behind the irregular noise of snoring sleepers and shifting horses. Their presence was reassuring, but he'd have been a fool, as well as an oaf, to distract them. A few rows of tents behind the defenders, the wounded slept restlessly. The mourners, non-combatant servants of the Dark Lady whose domain included healing, kept their own vigil among them, watching for sudden declines. Latar's priests were good company, as a rule, but Olvir didn't want to disturb the mourners on their duty either. There was always practice. The few sets of pels were barely holding together after rounds of recruits had trained with them, so by common agreement, nobody used them except those who truly did need help hitting their targets. Fighting the air, however, required only space. Olvir stood up and turned to retrieve his tunic. A woman stood a few feet away from him. That itself wouldn't have been a surprise or a problem. A relief, though he wouldn't have wished it, to find another who couldn't sleep. But Olvir hadn't heard her approach. Coming on top of his dream, it was more than he could reason through calmly. Before his brain caught up with his body, he'd hissed in a wary breath and reached for his sword. "It's a shade early for a duel," she said. As usual, Olvir recognized her voice before her face. He knew the tone in particular, soothing amusement. The words beneath the words were, "We can laugh about this. We're laughing already. We wouldn't be joking if it was any great matter." He'd used that manner of speaking before, when the minutes before battle bit into the throat like wire, but he'd heard it most often from the woman in front of him, Vivian Bathari, commander of the Sentinels who held the border. As was usual with the Sentinels, her clothes, dark plain wool beneath a mail shirt, gave no indication of her rank. The gold-worked hilt of a greatsword over her shoulder, and the eye-sized sapphire set in it, made a striking contrast to that.